Long ball is going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Slaughter.
Metcalf will go for the score. Unbelievable.
45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Logan, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow. It is Baker Mayfield.
I woke up feeling dangerous.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to another edition of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Jack McCurry. It's another victory pod as the Browns have won. They beat the Bengals 27-19. They are now 6-7 on the season. So time for another victory pod. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Anthony Jokey. How you doing, bud?
You know, this podcast almost didn't happen because we had some, well, I won't say we, I guess I had some major audio issues, and right now I am very annoyed at them, but I'm excited that we get to talk about another Browns win. I'm not excited that we have to talk about a lot of the drama that's gone on, but a win is a win, and we're here to discuss that.
Yeah, you're definitely right. A win is a win, although, I mean, like the majority of the wins this season, the drama and the distractions overshadow that victory, but let's dive right into it. I mean, obviously, yesterday, like I said, the Browns won. Let's go right into the offense. Like Baker Mayfield, he struggled, and this was definitely a surprising thing to a degree. We talked about on the pregame. I said that the secondary was their strong suit because obviously up front, while there is talent, they have struggled at stopping the run, but they've been okay at stopping the pass. But Baker struggled. Him and Kitchens both said after the game and today that the hand wasn't an issue, but it just looked like Baker wasn't himself. He was forcing the ball to Odell. His mechanics, his throwing like off his back foot and stuff just looked like an issue. Anthony, you were there in the stadium. Like, how were people reacting to Baker's performance, and how did you think Baker performed yesterday?
Well, it was not the greatest game, and I think that's pretty obvious from Baker. I think most of the fans were upset about the lack of running the football in the first half. I mean, when you have the leading rusher in the NFL and you're going up against a 32 ranked, which is dead last in the NFL rush defense, I think a lot of people expected us to run the ball a lot more. But in terms of Baker's effort yesterday, yeah, it was sloppy mechanically. That first interception was a joke. That should have never been ruled an interception. I don't know how they ended up calling that one, but that other one was a bad throw that went off the hands, and it's just a step backwards for sure. After it had some positive momentum in the passing game, but yesterday it was just a struggle. And give credit to the Bengals for being a 1-11 football team going into yesterday. They played hard. They outgained the Browns yesterday. The defense played well at times, and the Bengals had a shot to tie the game at the end. The Browns defense held, but that Bengals defense yesterday was not giving up easy points. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals, they're fighting despite being 1-12 now. I mean, it's apparent that they're not packing it on the season. They played hard against Pittsburgh. They beat a Jets team that was on a roll, especially on the defensive side. And, they played hard yesterday. Their offense couldn't score any points, which we'll get to in a little bit. But
let me get some scores to you for the Bengals this season. For those that say it's a win is a win. Stephen Thomas put this out, and I wanted to read this out. Seahawks 21, Bengals 20. Ravens 23, Bengals 17. Steelers 16, Bengals 10. Raiders 17, Bengals 10. They've played teams tough all season, and like we saw when the Browns went 0-16, it's very hard to accomplish that feat. You have to be very unlucky, and in those 4 games, it's just a one possession game, and they could have 5 wins right now. So they're not as terrible as we think. They've played teams tough this season, so that's where I'm at with the people complaining that we only beat a 1-win football team by 8.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry about that. Even though they're 1-12, they play hard. Obviously, they're coaching as well as they can with the lack of talent that they have, and there is some talent on both sides of the football. But they're fighting. It's just much like Miami. Like, obviously, there's not a lot of talent there, but Brian Flores has coached a hell of a job, and despite them, dumping the roster off, they're still fighting and getting wins down the stretch. Cincinnati is trying to get wins as well, even though they are secure right now to get the number 1 pick, and ultimately, I think they're going to draft Joe Burrow. But yeah, they're going to continue to fight. They fought yesterday. They looked at times like they should have beat the Browns, but obviously they kept shooting themselves in the foot. But I think they're going to continue to fight down the stretch. They may scratch out another win. Might not be this week. They're playing New England, so that'll be interesting. But like you talked about how the limited amount of running in the first half, and I don't know if this was just a head coaching adjustment, or common sense finally just prevailed. They started running the ball in the second half. This is actually a game where they ran more than they passed. But in the second half, they turned to Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, who we've been saying for weeks, like the offense should be going through them, and it did throughout the second half. Chubb and Hunt took over the game and ultimately helped the Browns get to a victory.
Yeah, once they came out in the second half, after they got the opening kickoff, you saw what the game plan was going to be in that second half, and it was very effective. It's almost like they should have been doing the whole game. Yesterday was a game where they probably could have ran the ball 40 times against the Bengals and would have won the game no problem. But you do have to mix the pass in there at some point. But I think with how bad the Bengals rush defense has been this season, that should have been the game plan. But look, these coaches know way more than we do. At least, that's the general consensus. And I think they might have opened up a lot in the running game by passing so much in that first half. But once they decided to stick with the run, they got Kareem Hunt in motion in that offense. It opened up things for Chubb and vice versa. So, we know what works with this offense. It's the passing game that has been, I don't want to say lackluster, but maybe average this season. And if they could just get that going, and, I think a lot of it falls on the topic we're going to discuss later with one of our wide receivers. But if they could get that other aspect complementing the running game with how well the running game is performing, that's where this offense could almost be unstoppable. But at least right now, the running game is effective, and they were able to run to win that game yesterday in the second half.
Anthony, what do you make of, people saying that we don't run the ball enough yet? And Doug Maurice of Cleveland.com even pointed this out today. People say they don't run the ball enough, yet Nick Chubb currently leads the league in both carries and rushing yards. And Kareem Hunt's averaging almost 5 yards a touch since his return from suspension.
Maybe it builds on what I just said. The running game has been so effective while the passing game hasn't, like I said, was average. I think when they see something that's been that effective, they want to stick with it. And I know you can't do that every single game. You have to throw the football in the NFL in order to win. But When you have one part of your offense that is so above and beyond the other, like the running game is over the passing game, I think that's what leads people to believe that they need to run the ball even more than what they are now, and they don't realize how much we've actually run the football this year.
Yeah, I was talking to people about it earlier today, and like my thing is, I think it's just the flow of the offense that I think is like the biggest issue with me. They obviously do run the ball enough; the numbers speak for themselves. It's just the way Freddie calls a game. I think that's what, and I don't know how much Monken has to say on it, which we'll get into that a little later as well. But just the flow of the play calling, I think, is what gets me a lot. Just because, we'll be up, like the Miami game, for instance, we were up 20 and they kept throwing the ball, and I'm thinking like, run the ball, burn the clock. Like that's what you do with a big lead like that. You just burn clock and hold the ball, time of possession, make sure that the defense, or don't give the other team a chance. I think like the flow of it is really what gets me going. Because obviously the numbers say that we are running just as much as we are passing.
Yeah, and you talk about the flow of the offense, and when you pass on first down as incomplete, then you run on second down. Maybe you get 3-4 yards. You're facing a 3rd and 6, and are facing a potential 3 and out already, and that's happened to the Browns countless times. Or you throw 3 straight passes on offense, and maybe you complete one, but you're facing a 3 and out at that point. It's the running game is built to help the offense flow, and there are so many different things that you can do off of it with the pass that is an extension of the running game, whether it be those quick swing passes, which they did to Kareem Hunt yesterday, out to the outside, or stuff like that. That's basically running the football, but it counts as a forward pass. But they're taking so many shots down the field that it disrupts the flow of the offense. And like I said, I think with the running game being so effective, when they actually go to it, the passing game is what's really holding back the real flow of this offense.
One thing that really I didn't have a problem with yesterday was the offensive line. And, Greg Robinson came back. That was obviously a boost, but the right tackle position got a boost yesterday, I think, too. Chris Hubbard, unfortunately, had to miss the game due to injury. Kendall Lamm, who has been like a mysterious player this year. He's been active a lot, but hasn't played. They've elected to go with McCray in certain spots, but he got the call at starting right tackle yesterday, and I thought he played well. Like, I didn't see any mishaps. There was no penalties. PFF has him graded pretty well. And the best part was, because I missed the first half, so I get into the second half of the game, and no complaints about the offensive line, really. Anthony, how do you think Lamb stepped up and performed at right tackle yesterday?
Yeah, he played well enough to where you didn't hear his name. And when you don't hear an offensive lineman's name, typically is when they're playing well. Obviously I was there, so I wouldn't have heard the commentary about it. But everything that I saw, watching the game, he held his own yesterday. And I know the Bengals don't have that stout of a defensive line. They do have some solid players there, but he held his own, and I'm more than fine with him being the guy to close the season out at the right tackle position. Chris Hubbard has not been good this year. He more than likely will not be back next season. I would be very shocked if he is, with the contract that he has. The Browns can certainly get out of it this offseason. So I would not be surprised. Let's just say I would be shocked if he's back. I'll put it that way. So I would be more than okay with evaluating Lamb as the right tackle. I'm not going to go into next season counting on him to be, per se. But if he's a guy who can fill in if there is an injury, on that offensive line, whether it be the left tackle, right tackle, in the future, these next few games, I think will prove if he can handle that.
Yeah, definitely. I would easily start him at right tackle down the stretch here against Arizona, Baltimore, and Cincinnati. This is his audition. If you can bring him back on another 1-year deal, relatively cheap, he would be a solid depth piece. And maybe if he plays well down the stretch, you bring him back, have him be the starting right tackle, and let him be the bridge to someone. If they get someone in the second, third, fourth round, let that player groom behind Lamm as the right tackle. It's crazy because I'm looking at the PFF grades. Shout out to Eric Brown for sharing them in our in the Browns group chat that I'm in. Not only did Lamm grade out well, Wyatt Teller graded out really well. He was the second highest rated Browns player. And those guys were actually the top-rated offensive linemen overall. Bitonio and Treader were the two worst. So that was really telling because normally you see Bitonio and Treader, they're the better of the offensive linemen, but Teller and Lamm graded out better than them in some aspects. It was nice to see the line played really well. Baker only got sacked once. Didn't see him get hit all that much yesterday. So if this is the starting unit, that's the best one going forward, you have to roll with this the last few weeks because you got to give Baker solid protection because he's been hit a lot this year, and you can't have let him get hit too much already. He's already got the hand injury. You don't want anything serious to happen down the stretch. And obviously, everybody's in pretty much an audition phase for the roster because I would expect, especially with the offensive line, a lot of changes coming with that group, especially this offseason. Minus Bitonio and Treader, those guys are safe moving forward.
Yeah, and I think Teller might be safe. I know they have Drew Forbes waiting around. We're not sure if he's going to play tackle or guard. I know they're very high on him. So we'll see where he fits into this equation going into next season. But, like I said, I don't see Chris Hubbard coming back. I would be shocked if Robinson comes back. But, that begs the question, and I know we'll discuss this a lot more. Do you really want to go into next season with two rookie tackles, one on each side? There are some guys out there free agent wise at the right tackle position that could make some sense as maybe a 1-year prove it kind of deal. But I think that bringing in a veteran, if you're going to bring in two rookie offensive linemen, makes sense. But I would not stick with the two tackles that are currently here.
Oh, my take. I think I made it last week. I'm open to bringing Robinson back. If they don't think Lamb's the guy, I would bring Robinson back and perhaps swing him over to right tackle. He has experience there, but that's a discussion for another day. Let's flip over to the. Go ahead.
I would be okay if they brought him back and maybe if they do draft the rookie left tackle. If the rookie left tackle can beat him out, that's fine. They could both be on the team. I don't know how much it will cost the Browns to bring back Robinson for another year, but a rookie left tackle contract with where the Browns are probably going to be picking is not going to be extremely detrimental. So I could see them bringing him back just as maybe a veteran present to maybe help out the two rookie tackles that they could potentially have.
Yeah, definitely. But, we'll discuss that once the season's over. Let's continue with the game. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. It was, a bend but don't break type performance. Cincinnati had over 450 yards of total offense, which, was kind of crazy. But like we talked in the pregame, they have talent on that side. Dalton always seems to be a thorn somewhat to the Browns ever since he was drafted. Mixon had a solid game. Tyler Boyd continues to have a solid game, but, the Browns, they didn't break. They had the one touchdown off the Mayfield interception, but, they held them to 4 field goals. They would get down to the red zone, but the Browns defense would clamp down outside of the Mixon touchdown. I thought the defense did okay, but, there's still a lot of room for improvement. But I get, there's we're really deep into the roster at some point, at some aspects of it.
Oh, definitely. The secondary and defensive line are walking mash units right now. Plus, having that suspension with Garrett doesn't help. The defense is very depleted, and we knew going into the season that this defense still needed some kind of depth. We knew that injuries were going to hurt the defense if they piled up. Obviously we weren't accounting for a suspension of our best player when we were discussing that, but there's a lot of young guys on that defense that are definitely fighting for their jobs, and some of those guys are playing well. Brian Cox Jr. Could be a potential rotational piece down the road if they decide to bring him back. There's some guys on this defense that are playing really hard and are playing for their jobs, and it'll be curious to see how they continue to improve over these last few weeks. I know that they don't have the easiest of games these next 2 games. We've seen guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick and Andy Dalton run a little bit on this Brown defense. Just imagine what Kyler Murray's going to do next week. Obviously, you have Lamar Jackson after that, who's probably going to be the MVP this season of the NFL. So they definitely have their work cut out for them. Anytime you can score points with your defense like they did yesterday with the pick 6, it's a good day on defense. Getting that extra touchdown proved to pretty much be the difference maker yesterday. I thought that they picked on Greedy Williams again. That seems to be a trend going on. I know that's because Denzel Ward is very good, and you saw with his pick 6 yesterday that teams think twice about throwing to his side. So I think that's why Greedy gets picked on the way he does. The tackling yesterday was subpar at best. I can't tell you how much it drives me nuts to see guys trying to tackle with their shoulders and not wrap up and whatnot, and try to go for a kill shot on their opponent. That drives me nuts. But I think that the defense played well enough to win yesterday. It is a team that was 1-11 going in yesterday, despite them playing some tough games this season. Like I said, scoring on defense helps, but the defense cracked down when it needed to with those couple goal line stands that they had against the Bengals. So there's definitely some positive things to take out of yesterday. They outweigh the negatives a little bit, but there's a lot of stuff that they have to clean up over these last few games.
Yeah, the tackling effort, has been poor much of the season. I don't know who's teaching them to tackle that way, but it's become a constant thing the last couple of years. Like, they've just become a poor tackling football team, and that obviously comes down to coaching. We even switched defensive coordinators and assistant coaches, and the tackling issue is still there. Guys that stood out, Sheldrick Redwine obviously has gotten an increased amount of playing time, and he's played well. He was the top-graded defender on PFF. And then you mentioned Brian Cox Jr. Obviously the Browns have had to go out and try to find guys on the edge in the wake of the Myles Garrett suspension. And, obviously they let Chris Smith go. They traded Jannard Avery a few weeks back, and they've brought guys like Brian Cox Jr. in, Porter Gustin. And Cox Jr. has been one of the guys that he has shown some flashes. He's definitely auditioning, obviously, for a future role, and he could be a nice depth option moving forward. Sheldon Richardson has played well, and he's been quiet, but he's been effective. And, I remember when we signed him, it obviously got overshadowed by the Odell Beckham trade, but Richardson's been a solid free agent acquisition for them. Larry Ogunjobi played well yesterday. I mean, those guys are playing well. Obviously, they can only do so much. But seeing guys like Cox Jr. step up in terms of the pass rush, and then Sheldrick Redwine taking a step, you hope, that he continues to get better. Obviously, he was a mid-round pick. No one expected him to have to be a contributor because we have guys like Demarius Randall. We had Morgan Burnett, but, it's nice to see Redwine playing well the last couple weeks.
Yeah, it has. He struggled early on, but I think with what they've been asking him to do, he's been able to grow in that role a little bit. Talk about Sheldon Richardson. I don't think there's enough you could say about what he's done this season, and you could certainly make the case, Jack, that he was probably the best move the Browns made this offseason. He has been nothing but stellar in that defense. You don't hear his name often, but when you do, it's definitely making an impact. And he does a lot of things that you don't hear about from the commentary on the game. He just works hard. He is always taking on double teams, and when he has opportunities to make tackles for loss, he does it. He has a few sacks this season, so he has played very well, and I think that he's definitely been the most underrated player, I think, on the Browns this season, based on what he's been able to do. So, look, there's been guys that have been able to step up. As we go through the rest of the season, the playoff chances are on life support at this moment. But there's some guys who are really fighting for their jobs next season, and I think that's shown over the last few weeks.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you actually brought up the playoff odds because, that'll be our next topic. And the Browns are still technically in the hunt. They showed it on TV last night during the Sunday night game. They're minuscule because right now, obviously, Pittsburgh's 8-5, the second wild card team. The Bills are 9-4, but then the Tennessee Titans, who have definitely been the surprise during the second half because Ryan Tannehill has come out as the new starting quarterback for them and has been playing lights out football. Obviously, they have Derrick Henry, who's second in the league in rushing. Great defense, great coaching out of Mike Vrabel and his staff. The Browns sit at 6-7. Obviously, they need a lot of help to get in, but it's nice still with 3 weeks to go that they're still technically in the hunt, although it is the minuscule of chances to get in.
Yeah, they have the tiebreaker right now over Oakland and the Colts, so that's helpful. They need Tennessee to lose some games. They do have 3 very tough games remaining, so if Tennessee wins one more, the Browns might technically be eliminated next week if the Tennessee wins one more, since they do have the head-to-head tiebreaker. We'll have to check on that one, but obviously the Steelers can. I'm not sure who would have the tiebreaker in that one. I know we split the season series. I think it might go down to conference record, which right now the Steelers are 6-3. We're 6-4, so they still have one more AFC conference game than we do remaining. So, like I said, the playoff chances are on life support at this moment. We'll see how it turns out. I'm not expecting them to make the playoffs. They could sneak in, but they're going to have to win the last 3 games. And when you have Arizona this Sunday, it's not going to be an easy game. Obviously, when you're facing the reigning MVP or the potential MVP in Lamar Jackson, that's going to be a tough game. We'll see how the weather plays a factor in that one because that is 3 days before Christmas. And then the last game against Cincinnati on the road is going to be a tough game as well. So based on what we saw yesterday. So I'm not really focused on the playoffs at this point. I would be shocked if somehow they stuck in, but I think right now you could pretty much put the playoff talk to bed.
Before we move on to the off the field stuff, we did put out a poll last night on our Twitter account at the Dogland for who was the 1085 top dog player of the game. We had 4 choices. We had Nick Chubb, who once again had another 100-yard performance. Jarvis Landry, who led the team in receiving and had a very nice 40-yard screenplay towards the end of the game, which pretty much sealed the victory. Denzel Ward, who had the pick 6. And then Larry Ogunjobi, who led the team with tackles, also had half a sack and 3 QB hits. Anthony, who is your pick for top dog of the game?
Those are all very tough choices, but like I said earlier, anytime the defense, whenever the defense can score points and help your offense out, that helps you win football games. So I would have to give it to Denzel Ward yesterday for his pick 6.
Yeah, I actually was going to pick that as well, but the fans, even though it was a small sample size, it was only 50 votes, they went with Nick Chubb on this one. He got 70% of the vote. Denzel Ward came in second with 16%, Landry at 14%, and sorry, Larry, you got 0% of the vote, but we all love and appreciate you. You've been one of the top players on defense, but fans seem to love Nick Chubb. I think if you put a poll out who's the favorite Cleveland Browns player right now, I think Nick Chubb would lead that vote, definitely.
Oh, for sure. And you hear, I don't know how audible it is on TV, but anytime when they got down to the goal line, you just hear the stadium chanting for Chubb. I hope that comes across on TV because it's really cool to hear in person. So he's definitely the fan favorite for sure.
Absolutely. You could hear it on TV yesterday when after he ripped off that 57-yard run, people were yelling Chubb, Chubb, Chubb. Obviously Hunt got the touchdown, but you could definitely tell that people want Chubb to get into the end zone, and he's having an unbelievable year. One of the best seasons by a Browns running back in a long time. Now we're unfortunately going to get to the stuff that we really don't like to talk about, but we have to cover it. Let's just start with the Odell Beckham stuff, Anthony. There was the rumors last week that said he wanted out. He talked to the media, I think it was last Thursday, and said that he was happy in Cleveland. He didn't know what the future holds. But he said he'll worry about that stuff once he gets to the offseason. Well, yesterday, right before the game, Jay Glazer comes on TV on the Fox pregame show, and he says that, he doesn't see the relationship with the Browns ending well. He said he's talked to multiple players and coaches that said that Odell has told these people during or after the game or before games, come get me out of here. And, there was a report today through Yahoo Sports that said that Odell is just having a tough time finding himself. He's, he got all this fame and fortune, and now he just doesn't know what to do or what his life's going to hold. And, it makes you wonder what this is going to lead to, because we've seen how the diva wide receivers act. And not saying that Odell has been a diva. I think he's been good, pretty good for the most part since he's gotten to Cleveland. Obviously the attention he brings himself is distracting at times, but Anthony, do you think that the Browns can work out something with Odell? Obviously, his contract, the guaranteed money runs out after this year, so I think that does play a role into it, and obviously the injury as well. But do you think this is something that can be salvaged, or after this season, do you think Odell Beckham is going to ask for a trade out of Cleveland?
It's a tough question, and it's one that it's going to be hard for anybody to speculate on. But if it were me, I said yesterday on Twitter, I think a new contract would fix a lot of things. Obviously, the cure-all is winning, I believe, and if they can get to a point where they're winning consistently, that might convince him that this is the right place for him. I know. Maybe thank goodness Jarvis is here, because if he wasn't, this could have gone off the rails a long time ago. Maybe Jarvis is the only one that's keeping this the way it is right now. but it's so hard to answer that question because he's definitely somebody who is very unpredictable in what he does. I think that this situation is repairable, and that's to say, and that's to really say, is it really even broken at this point? Um, only he can answer that. But I think that it's very repairable. I'm not going to give up on him easily at this point. The the return that you would get for him is not what most people think it would be, based on his talent. Um, you know, you might not get a first in return, based on what's gone on this season. I think that you're probably looking at most a second rounder at this point. You're not going to get back what you gave up for him. So I would do, if I'm John Dorsey, this has to be maybe number one priority is to make everything right. Maybe shutting him down and so he could deal with his injury would be the right thing to do. I know he said that he wants to be there for his teammates, or that's what Freddie said about Odell today, is that he wants to be there for his teammates, and there really hasn't been a thought about shutting him down. But maybe that's the best option at this point, is to get him healthy and get him going in the right direction and eliminate the distraction for the rest of the season. But I think that the situation can be fixed. I think it will be fixed, and we're gonna, once we start winning, this is just all going to be stuff that will be long forgotten at some point.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. Like, I don't want to trade Odell by any means. Like, yeah, the stuff that comes with him obviously gets annoying, but I mean, this is what you get when you get a guy with the caliber of talent like Odell Beckham. I do think the contract thing would be one way to resolve it. I think he's frustrated to a degree because all the hype and the excitement that the Browns were gonna be a playoff contender, a dark horse Super Bowl contender, and he's only seen the playoffs once in his 6 years, and obviously they're gonna miss it again, barring a miracle. I think he wants to win. I mean, I think anybody that plays professional football wants to win. But yeah, I just hope that this stuff can get worked out because, like you said, like many others have said, anybody that thinks we're going to be able to trade him and get back what we got in return, it's not going to happen, especially if he's already asking out. I mean, the leverage, the Browns lose leverage in that aspect, so they're not going to get the first and the third and a player back like what they gave up. But yeah, it's definitely something that needs to get resolved. Hopefully the Browns can do it. We'll see how that goes. Obviously, another big story, and it pertains to Odell again. There was a report yesterday that he has a sports hernia. He's going to need surgery. The team or the media asked Baker about it in the post game, and Baker, gave his opinion on it, and he may have said a little bit too much than he needed to. He said he pretty much threw the medical staff under the bus, saying that it should have been handled better. Odell could have had surgery during training camp, only missed a couple games, but instead, I don't know, like, what if Odell refused surgery or the medical staff thought surgery wasn't needed. I mean, this seems like another story that Baker was in a position where he didn't need to comment on it. I know they asked him, but at some point, if it doesn't pertain to you, you just don't need to give your take on it because it just makes Baker look bad. I mean, I don't know if you disagree with that, Anthony, but I think we all know what we were going to get with Baker in this point. But if the question doesn't pertain to you, and I don't think he should have gave his opinion on it. That was just my take on it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in your Dog Talk article that you posted earlier today when talking about it. there's just some things where you don't need to speak on. And when you're a professional quarterback in the NFL, no comment is probably the best comment. And I know that, Baker's only in his second year. And as time goes on, I would like to think that he would learn some of these things and how to deal with these situations. And, and I think having a rookie head coach is part of this, to where, maybe that mentor isn't there, of somebody who's been through it all before, isn't able to help him in situations like these. You don't want to throw your training staff under the bus, especially if in the future they need to, help you out and whatnot. Those are people that you probably don't want to make angry, for sure. So, like I said, I think you hit it on the head in your Dog Talk article about Baker. He has some growing up to do, and I think that's a theme of this whole organization. This whole organization has growing up to do with where it was and where it has been, with being a losing culture and just a total dysfunction for so many years. This team has to evolve, from ownership to front office to the players to everybody. This team has to evolve in order to take the next step, and hopefully at some point they can do that.
Yeah, I think this is where, and I talked about this, I think, last week, where good veteran presence on this team would help. We have solid veterans here: Batonio, Treader, Schobert, Landry, and I think this also goes to the PR staff as well. Like, either Baker's not listening or these guys are poor at their job. Like, they have to tell Baker, like, how to handle these questions better. And if he's not listening to them, then that's bad on Baker, and he really does need to grow up. But I think good veteran presence would be able to pull Baker aside and be like, dude, if this isn't your place to say something, you shouldn't say something. Now, like, he handled the Myles Garrett situation perfectly, I think. But then, like, the Duke Johnson thing, I think he handled poorly. And this, I think he handled poorly. Like, there's times where Baker just needs to shut up. And especially yesterday with how poor he played, I really don't think he needed to shoot his mouth off the way he did.
I have a question for you. Where do you think this team would be, say, if they had the veteran and leadership like they did with those Eric Mangini teams, but they actually had the talent of this current roster?
I think they would be, we're 6-7 now. I could honestly see us being around the 9-4 mark. Yeah, like 8-5, 9-4, maybe even 10-3.
Yeah, I think that this offseason they need to go the route of injecting those players into this organization, those kinds of players. They got so young with the rebuild, and I think they need to insert guys who have been there before. They know how to handle themselves. They know how to be a professional. They know how to win close games. They know how to win playoff games. So I think that and maybe that starts at the top with the head coach. We don't know. We'll find out that fate coming up soon. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered about this team and about this roster, and it's going to be a fun ride, that's for sure.
Yeah, it definitely is. But what unfortunately isn't a fun ride, and this is going to be our last topic. We'll push back another one for later on this week. But Anthony, that D word is back as it pertains to the Cleveland Browns, and the D word I'm talking about is dysfunction. Saturday night, Cleveland.com posted an article about Odell Beckham's frustrations with the offense, and that this dysfunction was the word that got brought up. It was reported that Kitchens is the play caller, but he receives and this was the biggest thing I took away from it. He receives reported input from Todd Monken, who is the offensive coordinator, Ryan Lindley, who is the QB coach, and then Drew Stanton, who's currently on injured reserve, but is there essentially as a mentor to Baker Mayfield. Anthony, when I read this, I immediately thought of, and we had this conversation plenty of times on the podcast this season, the clock's winding down and Baker has to like hurry up and can't even read the defense and has to snap the ball quickly, or they have to call a timeout or something happens. Like, I could see that happening if you got four voices in your ear constantly, and that's going to lead to poor play calling, poor execution of the offense, and then mistakes like interceptions or bad pass protection. Like, it could lead to so many different things, and it's like, this is where the term "too many cooks in the kitchen" it comes to perfect use.
That's a great pun, by the way. Did they report that this is going on during the games? I didn't read it. Did they report that's going on during the games?
Yeah, it's essentially said that he receives game day input, which I would assume would be during the game, from Monken, Lindley, and Stanton. And they said that the quarterbacks have they're too hands on with the offense, which makes me think Baker might be as part of that problem as well.
Yeah. So look, to me, this would be a non-story if this is going on during the week and you're in the game plan and you're planning out what you're going to do on Sundays, and you make all these decisions during the week as a collective group, and then you have Freddie Kitchens with the final say on everything when it comes to game day. But if this is going on during the game, Jack, it is a big problem. The term "too many cooks in the kitchen" is might be an understatement at that point. And if you have one guy saying, "Well, we should run this play here," or "We should run this play here," maybe that's why we have such a disruptive flow of the offense that we've discussed. There's no one coherent, consistent game plan. If it's all these guys giving their input during the game, and it's it's almost like they're throwing a dart at the wall with different plays. Oh, let's run this one here. Let's run this one there. So I hope that's not truly the case, but if it is, that's a major problem, and it would certainly explain a lot of things that have gone on this season.
Yeah, and one other note, it says that there's a disconnect between Monken and Kitchens. And, you go back over the summer, our buddy Mike Silver even said that there was a disconnect, and we all kind of blew it off and said that obviously Monken is coming from Tampa. He ran a certain style offense. And he's coming in to work for Kitchens. He's not essentially the offensive coordinator. He just helps with the game planning. I mean, Monken knew what he was getting into essentially when he took the job here. And I think he was hoping that if the Browns were successful, it would piggyback into a head coaching role, which is ultimately what Monken wants. And obviously he's pretty much one of Kitchens' lackeys because Kitchens calls the offense and Monken has to sit in the booth. I'm sure he gives his input as clear as the report states, but Monken isn't essentially the offensive coordinator. So I would expect that change to come in the offseason where either they let Monken become the play caller and, take the load off of Kitchens, or Monken just steps down and leaves Cleveland, which I think will ultimately be the situation if Kitchens gets to stay.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to say that if Freddie Kitchens is back next year, Todd Monken won't be. I think that's pretty simple.
Yeah, definitely. Anthony, since we're here, we might as well discuss this topic because I don't know when we'll record next. But Joe Schobert was with the media today, and he was asked about the contract extension. Obviously, Schobert's a free agent after this year, and he said no offer yet from the Browns. So there hasn't been a number offered to Schobert and his representation from the Browns end. I'm sure Schobert and his representation have sent numbers over to the Browns. He is definitely a priority. to get back here. He's a second best defensive player behind Myles Garrett. He's one of the leaders on the defensive side of the ball. And honestly, even though Mack Wilson has shown flashes, that linebacker room is a mess. Obviously, Christian Kirksey's been sidelined with the injury, but it is a priority for them to re-sign Joe Schobert. And if they let him go, it's going to be a bad look for John Dorsey and the organization if they let Schobert walk.
Yeah, I mentioned Odell is the top priority. Well, Odell is 1A, Joe Schobert's 1B, or switch them around. You know, this is the captain of your defense. This is the guy who makes everything tick out there. He has played his butt off over the last couple of seasons, and I think he's proven himself. You know, a lot of the Joe Schobert haters, I think, have disappeared based on his performance. So it is definitely a priority to re-sign Schobert. I hope it doesn't get to the point where they get in a situation where they need to use their franchise tag on him. But that's something I would do if, you know, they can't work out a deal, at least a long-term deal. He needs to be back, and you know, if you let him walk, you're just creating another hole on your defense on a depth chart that has so many holes to begin with. You know, with safety and defensive line and corners, so you can't afford to create another hole when you have the resources to re-sign said player, and hopefully he's back next year.
Yeah, if they have to franchise him, it's, I think, $16 million. Our buddy Jack Duffin had posted it earlier today. That would be the worst case, because then that right there is the starting point of a extension talk. So I was of the opinion that you give him 5 years, $70 million with like half of that guaranteed. Now you'll be looking at a situation where if you sign him into a 5-year deal at $16 million per, I mean, that's going to hurt our cap situation, especially when we're trying to re-sign Myles Garrett, and then in a couple years, hopefully Baker, Denzel, Nick Chubb. So yeah, they got to get an extension done. And if they let him walk, I mean, like I said, it's going to get ugly, because we've seen players walk out the door and go excel elsewhere. If Dorsey does that because, you know, the price wasn't right or it's not his guy, I mean, the opinion on Dorsey has changed a lot, I think, here in the last year or so. So he does something like letting Schobert walk, it's going to get ugly for him, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. You know, it would be a very bad look, like you mentioned, if they let Joe Schobert walk out of here for nothing.
Anything else you want to discuss, Anthony?
I think that's it.
Alrighty. As always, you guys can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony Joki. That's Joki. You can follow me on Twitter at JMcCurryCLE. Check out our website, thedogland.com or dog.land. I posted our Dog Talk article this morning talking about the win, Odell and Baker, much like we discussed here on the pod. So definitely go check that out. Like, share, subscribe to our podcast. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We truly appreciate it. And as we get on out of here, as always, go Browns.